The National Assembly has passed the EFF motion amended by the ANC, with 248 MPs voting in favour of closing the Israeli embassy until a ceasefire has been agreed.
The original EFF motion wanted the embassy closed and a suspension of all diplomatic relations.
The EFF, ANC, AIC, in fact, Al-Jamaa, NFP, ATM, PAC supported the motion, with the DA, the ACDP, FF+, as well as the IFP all against.
If there was ever a time to keep negotiations and discussions open, it was now. You may not be aware of that, but at this moment there are negotiations going on in Israel, between Israel and Palestine. You will not know that. And the first of those negotiations will probably lead to the release of 50 hostages, women and children. And it will not lead necessarily to a ceasefire, but it will lead to a suspension of hostilities for approximately 5 days. So that process is now going on. But the South African government, with this position of yours, have decided
Order, honourable members.
South Africa wants to opt out. We don't want to have anything to do. We don't want to have anything to say.
I firmly believe that we are losing the opportunity as South Africa to be honest brokers in the situation. And as we now speak, Israel and Hamas have said they are a truce and captive release deal is closer than ever. And this has been facilitated by third-party countries. South Africa could play that role, but by this amendment, we are basically, and yes, it is, should it pass as a motion, it is a call upon the government, and government will then take its decision separately. But I would urge government to really consider, and I'd urge the ANC to consider what the Honourable Durka Minister herself said 4 months ago, 4 months into the Russian-Ukraine war. She said, the international community must focus on finding a sustainable solution. That has been South Africa's position on Israel and Palestine continually. The minister emphasized that a solution will not be found in isolating one party or trying to bring a party to its knees. Yet this is exactly what this amended motion seeks to do.
Our forefathers and our founding fathers considered that the only way for us to achieve what we have today is through peaceful negotiation. Now, one would understand that the circumstances in Israel and Palestine are different, somewhat different from what we went through here. The loss of lives is unacceptable on both sides, where women and children are suffering as a result of the fact that leaders can't come together, and even the United Nations cannot come together to arbitrate in this matter. We would like to say that we still support a two-state solution, and we feel that we should not play ourselves out of this game as South Africa.
This compromise between the two political parties indeed shows that they are focusing on wanting a peaceful solution, putting pressure on the Israeli government, something that nobody on this left did, other than the EFF. None of these political parties made a single statement directly condemning and asking Israel to stop blowing up these children and these hospitals. 75 years negotiations, Chairperson, have been taking place. Nothing has been achieved. So what negotiations are we talking about? What do you want to negotiate? The only way you can negotiate is by putting pressure on them to come to the negotiating table, and that is what we are doing. We are now putting pressure to say, let's have a ceasefire. Why is there this thing about going on killing and killing and killing? Why can't we stop it and say, let's sit down and talk about it? But if you didn't achieve it, Chairperson, for 75 years, are we going to achieve it now because the DA or the ACDP or the Freedom Front said we must do it? They could have played a pivotal role, Chairperson. They could have, in bringing pressure to the Israelis, together with all of us, and saying, let's find a peaceful solution. They're not interested in that. Do you know why? It's all about the money that they get. This is what it is. They've sold their souls. That is basically what it's so. This is giving us an opportunity. Now remember the EFF motion, and that is what I would have agreed on originally. Shut it down and shut it down now. And the IFP, I want you to remember what happened during the days of apartheid. If you say negotiations or negotiations only, what about the tens of thousands of black brothers and sisters of mine that died? Maybe not of the IPA mine that died. Where did it come from? It's the violence that created it. What have you done to stand up the IFP and say to the Israeli government, to the relationship you've got and the monies you'll receive, can you please stop?
SABC News reporter Bulelani Phillips joins me now. Bulelani, good evening. Strong views from the floor. The question for us now is, what happens next in terms of actions from our government?
Good evening to you, Iman, and to the viewers at home. Well, basically, let me just maybe go back to the context of how this kind of motion has been brought to Parliament. You'll recall that about 3 weeks ago, when Cabinet made an announcement, was that they had not yet taken a decision of whether to expel the Israeli ambassador to South Africa. But what they did say is that they had actually withdrew all the diplomatic mission staff that were in Israel. 2 weeks later, again, when the Minister of Departmental International Relations and Cooperations was in Parliament, she again said that she has not actually made any recommendation to Cabinet in terms of taking a stance with regards to the Israeli minister, or ambassador rather, to South Africa. But today, it's a different turn of events. The ANC supporting an EFF motion that says that all diplomatic ties with Israel must be cut, as well as the Israeli ambassador to South Africa must be cut as well and must be expelled. Again, to answer your question is to say that this resolution of the National Assembly must now be sent to the President for him to actually assent it as a resolution of the country. And you'd recall, as I've said in the context, is that the Cabinet had yet not made any decision regarding this matter. And for now, it's probably the first time that the sitting President is going to be adjudicating on this particular matter. Iman?
As you say, you know, it's quite a serious thing, and we're setting a precedent here with this action. And we've heard in previous discussions when this was first put on the table that once it's done, it's quite a long and convoluted process to restore those relations to what they were, or even to become better. What are some of the practical steps that will be taken? We heard, you know, quite an impassioned input from the NFP there about essentially just erasing, you know, all vestiges of the Israeli embassy in South Africa altogether. Quite strong views there. What happens to the actual infrastructure of diplomacy between our two countries?
Look, Iman, in essence, is that there's always going to be two sides to the story. On one end, and this is quite important, that the ANC has supported a motion that has been brought by the EFF. That was quite significant. And for them to support that motion, it means that as a party, as a ruling party, they've actually engaged within their own internal structures that they agree with what the EFF has made a motion on. That's very significant. But however, there are concerns on the other end from parties like the DA, the FF Plus, and the ACDP that this kind of posture may have some economic consequences for the country, given the economic ties between some of the companies that operate in Israel, as well as some of the state-owned companies that have business with Israel. So the concern really there is that the decision that South Africa is making may have an impact in terms of how the two countries are going to be cooperating going forward. But again, as an overriding factor here really is that the ruling party has re-emphasized the point that they want the International Criminal Court to actually pursue a prosecution case against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think that, again, is a significant thing that we can read out of this debate.